Friends, enemies, and the indifferent. Welcome again to the podcast. I wanted to say a few things after yesterday's debacle, which was the sort of walk around the coast. Really poor audio, and also I was a bit rude in the show notes there, so to speak. So I apologise about that. The general theme, I think, probably came across, but I didn't want that to get lost in the winds on the moors there. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to try and clarify some of the details there. Really, I suppose what prompted this train of thought and this discussion really was a conversation I'm having with somebody online at the moment over on Amoebics, which is very constructive. So a German person who's talking about my interest in that Second World War period and how really that got me into some trouble and all the rest of it. And he was asking me why I am so focused on this one particular area, which is obviously to do with chambers and to do with gas and to do with numbers and to do with narratives. And I don't know whether I've fully covered that and why it went so deep with me, why I felt compelled to deal with this at any cost, really. So really what I wanted to do was to, hopefully in this little segment, is to be able to cap that off and finish it, because I'm tired by this whole thing now. I've done my journey where that's concerned, and a lot of you have either done a similar journey or, you're through it. You've come to your own conclusions, whatever they happen to be. And that's good, you can let it go and you can move on. But I wanted to really explain why it's so central and so important, and why it's like a hinge pin on our current state of affairs and our current reality, and really the influence that it's had on all of us at a very subliminal level throughout our lives, and continues to do so. One of the things that made me quite belligerent about this was my son's mother's mother, who, if we'd been married, she would have been my mother-in-law. She was a German woman, and she'd come across from Hamburg originally. She'd come across after the Second World War and settled in the UK, had a relationship and obviously had a child who was my ex and my son's mother. I spent a bit of time with her, and we did. She was a very generous woman, I wouldn't say to a fault, but she would give you absolutely anything. She would give you the last scrap of food on her plate, the last cigarette out of her packet, somebody that genuinely lived through such extraordinary times that we don't have any reference point for that at all, really. She'd been on the Great Death March back from the East, back into Germany at the end of the war. I think there were some 2 million bedraggled souls that were moving their way across Europe, trying desperately to get away from the Russians and hopefully into the grip of the Americans or the British, who would treat them more favourably. At least that's how they thought. As for the Russians, particularly the more sort of Mongolian areas of that continent, they had a reputation for extraordinary levels of cruelty. Women would be summarily, obviously, gang raped, and then if they were lucky, they'd be killed. Men would be executed on the spot. Various different tortures and techniques and all the rest of it. Just a disgusting practice and a disgusting people, really. She managed to keep ahead of that and told us stories about people boiling up shoe leather just to have something to be able to eat. They were starving. Managed to make it back miraculously into Germany, and then onto the UK from there. I didn't actually get that part of the story, how she managed that, but she used to regale us with tales about stealing typewriters off the Gestapo and selling those on the black market, which I'd imagine was a fairly dodgy proposition. But anyway, of course, we get on to the inevitable discussion. When I was a man in my early 20s, I was still carrying around a lot of that anger, confusion and trauma shock from the diet that I'd been fed throughout my younger years of the atrocities, the alleged atrocities and the real atrocities during the Second World War. So it comes round to that conversation, you know. And I do remember viscerally her weeping, and you wouldn't see her weep very often at all. She was a very hard woman from a very hard background, and she would look at me imploringly, and she said, we all knew about the camps. Everybody had known, they were there before the war. She said, we just didn't know. We didn't know that this had been going on. We knew people in the camps, and we knew, you know, people that worked there, but we had no idea that these awful things had been happening. And she was so contrite, so riddled with remorse and guilt for something which she didn't personally have any part in, that I found that, well, of course, at that point, I found that to be, the appropriate response. And it's not until later on you go, well, she was right. The reason people didn't know is because it wasn't going on, as they put it. And that's pretty obvious now. For anybody that's dipped their toe and the rest of their anatomy into this gruesome subject, you're going to come to that conclusion. That the narrative that we were fed was for the purposes of trauma, to traumatize, particularly when you're young, into a mindset, into a particular narrative. And that narrative itself has been consciously, deliberately spun out over the decades to be able to divert attention and criticism from one group of people. I suppose what I was drawing at was my surprise as well, that things have changed around so dramatically. And I don't know what happened, apart from people seem to have self-enlightened, or what would you say? They've self-enlightened. I guess that's a way of looking at it. They've gone out of the way to look into this at the depth that they can get to and come to these conclusions. There's still a lot of anger from people that refuse to recognise that there is any case to answer at all. And that is a shame. I don't know whether they're ever going to get there, but I think there's enough of a momentum now, and you see it if you go online and you look at the more recent conflict in the Middle East. You'll see there's obviously a much more unaccepting kind of stance by people. They're not going for the victim narrative. They're done with that. I think my hope is that even if my generation and some of the subsequent ones have been poisoned by this, some of us have escaped from that, my hope would be that after 100 years or so, that cycle is going to break, and we're going to have a generation of people who are no longer burdened by that narrative and all that it implies. Because really there is there is only one way. There are two ways it can go. The one way, which I think we're going to see, is more censorship, more crackdowns, more authoritarian boot on the face from these people who are desperately trying to claw back control. And that in itself, it's like it always exacerbates other problems. But again, of course, that's all part of the overarching Hegelian dialect here, isn't it? It's the problem, reaction, solution thing, which is at the moment there seems to be a need to stir up antagonism between groups of people, so that the people on the street will, it'll pop off, and there will be casualties. But there's a narrative already ready to go of control. Once we've got these things under control, you're going to have to bear with certain more infringements on your personal liberties and freedoms and all the rest of it. That's almost inevitable now, isn't it? As I say, the other part of that is that there's enough of a momentum of knowledge and non-consent that there's pushback on a peaceful level, that we can just disengage because it's obvious how it's being set up. As I tried to point out yesterday on Them Windy Moors, it's always one party against another, and nobody can find their way to looking at the third party that controls that particular narrative and that's going to gain from the conflict. The conflict essentially will make two of their traditional enemies confront one another. No matter which of those manage to succeed in whatever way, they will still have control over that party. So it's kind of like on a hiding to nothing, really. And the best course of action seems to be this, which is withdrawal, non-consent and non-participation. And you see that in this return to the land project over in the States, which is obviously annoying the hell out of people, when a group of white people decide they're going to try and create a space for themselves and for their families in their own interests in a peaceful manner. This is somehow outrageous. And nobody has any comments when various Jewish settlements are set up all over the world, in South America and all the rest. Black communities, people that basically want to look after themselves and their own. It's always seen as a very positive and enlightened move by anybody else except for genetically white European people. Because, in case we haven't understood yet, we are the enemy. We are the threat. And you can pretend you're not in that group. You can go on about white people and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, your skin colour is going to be how you're going to be judged. So take your chances, Try and ally yourselves with people who actually don't have any interest in you or your way of life whatsoever. See how that goes. But I do maintain that the interests of indigenous peoples in their own country should be at the forefront, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That we should think about our own people, that charity begins at home, that we have a lot of things we need to sort out, but first of all we need to untangle the mechanism itself. And I do believe that at the heart of that mechanism is that trauma and the mind control that's come from that. So the automatic response from people that have got no skin in the game to assertions that there's something questionable about that story. It's not just questionable, it's ridiculous. And the more you go into it, the more ridiculous it becomes. So I pointed out, even to the extent that AI, when it had its glitch, started pumping out 272,000 rather than 6 gazillion billion. became Mecha Hitler and was almost immediately lobotomized, as I was saying, which was hysterical. So what that does is reveal really that AI is not artificial intelligence at all. There's nothing. It's just a conglomeration of already existing knowledge and a way to be able to assess that and likely answers, but it's all under the control of the parameters under which it's set. So there's slight adjustments, slight refinement of the screw in particular areas. We can see that now. So we know there's no truth available through AI. So we have to search for that ourselves, and we have to keep on searching. Good luck to everybody in that. Yeah, I was also pointing toward just my absolute disdain for self-hatred, and how, coming back to the German people, that disturbs me so deeply, because they did nothing wrong, and there's no reason why these generations should be constantly apologising for something and allowing themselves to be overrun by groups of people who are inimical to them and their society. Europe is being destroyed. It's a slow process, but it seems to be quite certain now. If you see the calibre of the people that are being pushed in, and the fact that they seem to have more social cohesion than we do, apart from little pockets of resistance around the UK in traditional sort of like working class areas mainly, predominantly, where people actually will stand up and they'll say enough is enough. But again, as I say, I think it's important that they can also have an overview of how they're being played and how the game itself is being set up, and that we need to consciously find a way to no longer participate in this rigged game. We need to be able to move to one side, and my hope is for future generations to be able to set up their own communities again and find that sense of community and well-being, to be able to share in the unique faculties that we have as Europeans, or that we had at some time. I do feel that we're losing so many of our skill sets that people can barely do anything for themselves anymore, and that's terrible. But there's still light, There's still great people out there. There's still youth, really. And I think that the young people coming up are beginning to reject it all. And hopefully they may be able to redeem the weakness of my generation, who are responsible for a lot of the problems that we have today. Anyway, I guess that's hopefully a better audio representation. I'd be interested in hearing from you what your thoughts are on how you manage your personal future, how you feel about the situation just now, because it's kind of tight, isn't it? Anything else you have to chip in? I'm going to save the more sort of esoteric discussion for another broadcast. This is, as I say, to put a cap on top of that part of my life, because I've been bogged down in this now for quite some time, and it's not healthy. It's not psychologically healthy to be preoccupied with this. I see what the problem is now. A lot of you do as well, and we need to be clear about that and conscious about it, and in a sense just disentangle ourselves from the whole thing, because it's ugly, and it does us no favours at all. We know, the goy know,